Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're making S.O.S. There are actually two versions of S.O.S. This is an old military dish. Best I can figure, it was created by a military cook years and years ago. There's the army version, which is made with ground beef, and that's what we're making today. And there's another version made with chip beef. And I did this video years and years ago. It's one of our old ones that has the whistle all through it and the bad color, the bad sound. So I thought it was time to redo it because this is a really budget-friendly recipe, and with the way the price of groceries is just going through the roof, a lot of folks are struggling to feed their families, and this is a good recipe. It's a basic recipe and it's a quick recipe. So you can really stretch that pound of ground beef and feed a lot of people if you need to, or you can make it, and feed just a few people. But anyway, it's a good budget recipe. I raised my kids on this stuff, and because it's so inexpensive and so fast and easy, when they were in school on weeknights, this was like a weekly dish because, when you get home late and you can get dinner on the table in 15-20 minutes, that's what you need. Anyway, it has just a few ingredients because it is a basic dish. You need a pound of ground beef, and you need some seasoning. I just use salt, pepper, and onion powder, and that is to taste. Now, I said I did this video a long time ago, and I had a lot of comments, and I had a retired Army cook who said that he made this for 30 years while he was in the military, and he said the only thing that they did different was that they would add beef bouillon to it. And if you are on a budget and you're trying to really stretch your food and stretch your dollars, this is one of the things that your grandma and your mom had in her cabinet to help her do that. Whether you use the cubes or the powder, it doesn't matter. Get you some of that and keep it in your pantry because you can really stretch your food with it. You can use just a pound of meat in whatever you're cooking and then add bouillon to it to get extra flavor. With a pound of meat, I don't feel like it's necessary if you're only doing 2 cups of gravy, and that's what I'm doing. And for the gravy, you need 2 cups of milk and 1/4 cup of flour. Now, if you're doing more or you're doing less, you want 2 tablespoons of flour per cup of milk. And if you're on a budget, again, you can substitute part of the milk for water if you need to, and you can use any milk in this. You can use canned milk, you can use powdered milk, because it's not really going to change the taste. And I would say probably lots of times when they make it for the military, they make it using powdered milk. And the only other thing you need is you need some toast because you serve this over toast. So let's get our hamburger cooking. And you can use any grade of ground beef in this. You can use super lean stuff, or you can use the 70-30 regular ground beef. Buy whatever's on sale. I have ground chuck today. And like I said, with 2 cups of gravy, the pound of meat is going to give you plenty of beef flavor. You're not really going to need to add the bouillon. But if you want to add a teaspoon, add a teaspoon or even 2. If you're adding the bouillon, you want to do about a teaspoon per cup of liquid. And like I said, if you need to stretch this, you can do 4 cups of gravy with your pound of ground beef. A pound will feed at least 6 people, because when my kids were growing up, I always made a pound and there was 6 of us. And if they had friends over, I'd add extra gravy. I would just use extra milk and make more gravy and feed the rest of them. You want anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 cup of gravy per person. If they're really hungry, make sure you've got at least 1/2 cup per person, because you can just make more toast if you have more gravy. The spices really are all to taste. I probably use close to a tablespoon of onion powder in mine. And I put some in the meat when I'm cooking it, and then I'll add some more when I make the gravy, so that I've got that onion flavor in my gravy too. And I do the same thing with my salt and my pepper. I put a little in when I'm cooking my meat, and then I add a little more when I'm making my gravy. And I like this dish kind of peppery. If you don't put so much pepper in it. And also, if you want other spices in it, you can put other spices in it, because like I said, this is a really, really basic dish. You can add just about any flavor in it you want to. You could certainly cut up fresh onions and put in here if you want to. Just dice up maybe a medium onion and put it in here. I use onion powder because that's what I used when my kids were growing up, and I used it when my kids were growing up because it was one of those meals that I could get on the table really fast, and that extra few minutes that it took to chop an onion, I didn't always have it. But if you've got fresh onion and you want to use it by all means. And like I said, about a medium onion is what you need in this. But it's to taste, so you can use as much onion as you want. Now for this dish, because we're going to be making gravy out of this and we're going to be serving it over toast, you do want to bust the ground beef up pretty fine when you're cooking it. And as you cook it, just stir it and keep busting it up. The big lumps just don't give you the consistency that, well, they don't give me the consistency I want. I guess if you want big chunks, that's up to you too. But we like it better if it's busted up pretty fine. And because it's one of those dishes where you're trying to stretch the ground beef and make it feed more people, if it's busted up better, it will go farther. I mean, you can easily make 4 cups of gravy in here and nobody's going to notice that you've really stretched your meat and it's feeding more people with less ground beef. So, and it'll still satisfy everybody too. I said I did this video years ago, and it was one of the ones with the bad sound, and we had to whistle all through it and everything. And also we had this crazy camera angle that was over there under the cabinet, and it shot through into the living room, and you could see the TV on the background, and you could see the pantry that was here that I took out to put this in. But there was always a Western on the TV in the older videos, and I would get more comments about the Western on the TV than I did about the food I was cooking. And Melinda found this recently. It's all the main actors, the stars of Bonanza, which was an old Western, and it's autographed by all of them. We don't know if it's real or not, but she shared it with me, and I thought I would share it with you because I thought it was really cool. She just found it. But if you remember my old videos, we watch the old Westerns all the time. There's not much on TV nowadays worth watching anyway, so we do the old stuff. But I thought this was really cool, and I thought I would share it with y'all. And I also got some mail. I got a letter from William, and William lives right down the road in Harrogate, and he was asking about buying my cookbook locally. Right now the only place you can buy it is on Amazon. I don't have any other sites set up to sell it, and I don't even have anybody local that sells it. I have been for 6 months planning on going to talk to the local tourism people and get on the list to do local festivals and stuff at least a couple times a year, and I haven't even managed to find time to go talk to them. So that may be, in the near future, I'll go talk to them and maybe do some of the local festivals, and you can buy it that way locally. And if I get time, I might go down to Cumberland Gap and the gift shops maybe and see if a couple of the gift shops or a gift shop down there is interested in carrying it, because it is something that a lot of local folks want. But I haven't had time to do that yet. I'm working on it, and right now I'm sorry there is nowhere locally to buy it. But thank you for your letter and your question. I also got a letter from Linda, a very nice letter. Thank you, Linda. And I did try to contact you. We are going to try to help with your request in this letter. And you should be hearing from us again soon. And thank you, Linda, for your very nice letter. And I'll be in touch with you. I also had a gift when I checked the mail. Diane sent me a dough blender. I had mentioned in a video, I don't know, 6 months or so ago, that I had a dough blender and I broke it years ago. So I always use a whisk when I'm cutting butter and stuff into my flour. And she said she uses one just like this and she hopes I enjoy it. It is much sturdier than the one I broke and will probably last me the rest of my life. So thank you, Diane. That's very nice. Now, as your ground beef cooks, go ahead and continue to bust it up. It's not quite as fine as I like it yet. There's still some pretty good sized chunks in there. I'm just using a really sturdy fork to cook this with. I think this works better than any gadget I've ever had. And a lot of folks think that you can't use metal in cast iron. This fork is not going to hurt this cast iron. That's one of the great things about cooking in cast iron is you can't scratch it. You can't hurt the surface. You're not going to chip it. I could take this fork and grind it down to the end of the handle and it's not going to hurt my cast iron. So you can use metal in it or anything else you want. I wouldn't really recommend using plastic in it because it gets hotter and it will melt it. But you know, you don't need to worry about scratching your cast iron. You can use that fork and really bust your hamburger up into tiny pieces and it's going to be perfectly fine. And the fork also works really good for stirring the gravy. So I use it for the whole cooking process on stuff like this. Okay, this looks pretty good here. My hamburger is in pretty small pieces. This was ground chuck. It was 80-20, and I want to talk just a little bit about the fat content in this. The more fat you have in your ground beef, the more filling your dish is going to be. So if you want to feed like 12 people with a pound of ground beef and the gravy, you might want to go with a 70-30 and leave all the fat in it. Fat has a lot of calories in it and it is very filling. So the more fat, the more filling the dish is going to be. Fat also has a lot of flavor in it. I don't like my gravy really greasy, and if you're cooking it, especially if you're cooking it in an iron skillet, but if you're cooking it in any skillet, if you have more fat than you want, especially, you know, if you're dieting or something and you don't want a ton of fat in your food, you want to get some of it out. It's very hard to drain ground beef that you have busted up into pieces this small. You can use a paper towel and just take out some of the grease, and it's easier to monitor how much grease you have removed with a paper towel than it is if you're trying to drain it and not spill it. I mean, this you would have a very hard time even draining it in a colander. You could do it in one of the mesh colanders with the wire screen. You wouldn't want to do it in one of the old pasta colanders with the holes. Now you can see here, this has almost no fat in it. Normally I have a lot more fat than this with ground chuck. I'm not sure why there's not more in here. Maybe it was mislabeled, I don't know. But if you want to take some out, you can just take your paper towel and soak it up until it gets to the point where you've removed enough grease. And a lot of folks too think that you have to have a ton of grease to make gravy. You do not. You have to have 2 tablespoons of flour for every cup of liquid. That's what you have to have. A little bit of grease will go a long way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add my flour. And even though it doesn't look like I have a lot of grease in here, all of my hamburger is coated with grease, and my flour is going to soak up all that grease. Now at this point you want to kind of stir it non-stop. And I'm going to go ahead and add in a little more onion powder. And if you add in your onion powder now, it will cook and it will kind of give you the flavor of like sauteed onions more than a fresh onion flavor. So if you want a fresh onion flavor, wait and add your extra onion powder after you've added your milk. If you want a sauteed onion flavor, add it now. If you're new to cooking gravies, this is going to concern you. As you cook that flour, it's going to stick to the bottom of your pan. You can see it coating the bottom of my pan all and sticking to it, and it looks like I'm going to have a mess that I'm never going to get cleaned up. It's fine. As soon as I add the milk, all that's going to come off the bottom of the pan, and that's what's going to give my gravy all of its flavor. The browned flour, the browned beef fat, and the toasted onion powder. And I do scrape the bottom of the skillet as I do this. And you want to cook your flour for at least a minute, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. A lot of folks have commented and said that whenever they make gravy with flour, it tastes like raw flour. Well, you got to cook it for a minute. And you don't have to cook it long, but you do have to cook it for a minute. And it's going to cook a little bit more when you add your milk, but you can't get this stuff here that's stuck on the bottom of the pan if you use cornstarch and thicken it. I said a lot of folks won't put the flour in it because they say it tastes like flour. Well, just cook it a little. You can add cornstarch to your milk and thicken it with cornstarch, especially if you have a gluten allergy. You could do a tablespoon of cornstarch per cup of liquid, and you put it in the cold liquid and then you add it to the pan. But that's not going to give you the brown stuff on the bottom of the pan. Okay, now I'm going to add my milk all at once. My flour's cooked to plenty. And I'm just going to keep stirring it until my gravy gets thick. And I'm going to scrape the bottom of the pan so that all that stuff that I burned on the bottom there or stuck to the bottom comes off. And I am going to go ahead and I'm going to add some more salt and pepper. And like I said, this is just to taste. So you'll have to taste yours as you cook it, as it gets done. It's not going to taste like much until you let that gravy get a little bit thicker. And I do like a little pepper in here, about like that. You can put your salt and your pepper in when you put your flour in if you want to. It won't change the flavor much because you're not cooking it that long. But as you cook pepper and salt, they both lose flavor. So that's something kind of to keep in mind, I guess. You have to use a little more pepper if you cook it longer. And you have to use more salt if you cook it longer. I kind of go around the sides of my pan a little bit too as I let it cook, so much doesn't build up around the edge of the pan. I don't know if you can hear this or not, but as I was scraping this, I wasn't hearing my fork on the bottom of the pan at all. That's because it had all that flour and stuff stuck to the bottom. Now I can hear my fork against the bottom of my smooth pan. When you make your gravy, if it's too thin, you just keep cooking it longer. If it's too thick, you can always add a little more milk. And if you have leftovers, you're going to want to add a little bit of milk to it when you reheat it to thin it back out, because it gets thicker as it cools, and any leftovers are going to turn into a paste that you could literally cut with a knife almost. but you can add a little milk to them when you heat it up, and it will turn right back into creamy gravy, just like what we're making now. So it does make good leftovers. If you're new to cooking too, I'm stirring this with the flat part of the fork like this. I'm not stirring it like this. And that's because that gets everything off the bottom. If I stirred it like this, I'd just have a whole bunch of little bitty streaks in the bottom of my pan, and I would probably never get it cleaned off. I'm starting to get a few little bubbles now, and my gravy is starting to thicken. And we're going to want to cut this off before it gets as thick as we want it. I got some trails with my fork when I stir it now, but I want it just a tiny bit thicker. If you like it thinner, you're probably going to want to quit cooking it right here as soon as you get the first streaks with your fork. You can see how it like pushes up as I'm stirring it, and it's deeper on the side that I'm pulling it toward. That's starting to thicken, and I'll get a nice trail in it, and it's gonna, like I said, get a lot thicker as it cools. And I think I've got mine where I want it, right there. It's gonna be about twice as thick by the time you get it served. So you do want to quit before it gets super thick. You can see there I've got a nice trail. I can even stir it, and you can almost see the bottom of the pan. See, you can see the bottom of the pan when I stir it with this spoon. It's completely clean, nice and shiny and black. That's because all that stuff that's stuck on the bottom boils off in your gravy, and that thickens it and adds all the flavor to it. And that's what you want right there. Now, if you've never had S.O.S. before, you're obviously going to need some ideas for what in the world to serve this with, because what do you eat hamburger gravy with? Well, here's what we ate it with. When the kids were little, we would do scrambled eggs and hash browns and some kind of fruit for dinner. A lot of times it was applesauce. And you can use fresh fruit or canned fruit, any kind of berry, even strawberries or something would go good with this. Just an apple or a banana. But this is a good use, especially in the wintertime, for your canned fruits when you don't have a lot of fresh stuff. So a lot of times that was what we would have with it. When Bret and I have it, we almost always have it with breakfast food. The gravy and the toast just go good with hash browns and eggs. So that's how we have it most of the time. You can also do it just the S.O.S. with some fresh garden goodies, some tomatoes and cucumbers and stuff. It really is such a basic dish that you could serve it with a lot of different stuff. And it's kind of up to you what you put with it. I just wanted to give you some ideas because, like I said, if you've never had S.O.S., you're going to have a hard time deciding what to make with it. But that's some ideas. Like I said, fresh fruit, canned fruit, frozen fruit, anything like that. Fresh vegetables. I like it better with the stuff like cucumbers and tomatoes than I do with like carrots and broccoli and stuff like that. Or even a salad, just the plain vegetables. And definitely it's good with breakfast stuff. You could even, oh gosh, I don't know, fried apples. Definitely fried apples are good with this. And I'll put a link to some of the videos where I did other stuff like this, especially the fried apples, because you got to try this with fried apples if you've never had them. This is probably one of the easiest, most budget-friendly dishes I made the whole time my kids were growing up. Because you can take a pound of ground beef and you can feed 8, 10, even 12 people with it if you make more gravy. And you can cut your milk in your gravy. This really does need to have the milk gravy on it. I mean, it's a totally different dish without the milk gravy. But you can cut it, and you can do half milk and half water if you need to. And add a little bouillon in there to boost the flavor if you do that. Like I say, get you some chicken and beef bouillon and keep it in your pantry, because I got a feeling with the way grocery prices are going, we're all going to need some of those tricks that our grandmas used to stretch our food, to stretch our dollar, and to feed our families. Before we go, I want to leave you with John 16:22. And ye now therefore have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart shall rejoice, and your joy no man taketh from you. As Christians, we have that peace and we have that joy. We know that this isn't going to last for forever, and we know that we are going to see Jesus again. And that's how we can keep a smile on our face, and we can keep joy and peace in our hearts. I want to thank y'all so much for joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen. If you have not already, please don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave. And until next time, remember to put God first.